Alrighty guys, today we are talking Paranoia, the TTRPG. So what is Paranoia? Well, it takes place in a 1984 Big Brother is watching type of dystopia. A lot of THX going on, a lot of Soma from Brave New World, and basically the players are just like people in this world trying not to get killed by the mega omnipotent Big Brother figure that is watching over them. Okay, so my favorite summary of the game comes from 1D4chan, so I'm just going to read that off really quick to give you a good idea as to what the game is like more specifically. Paranoia is not a humorous role-playing game about a distinctly Orwellian dystopian future and living in a sealed city run by a psychotic computer. On the contrary, Alpha Complex is a utopia. Friend Computer is wise and benevolent and not at all murderous. There are no communists, mutants, traitors, or secret societies, and technology is more advanced than has ever been in the history of civilization. And research and development does not routinely involve handing out prototype weapons, which will of course never let loose a nuclear explosion if dropped. There is nothing of note outside of Alpha Complex, and all of its citizens are completely happy to live inside it and never leave. Happiness is mandatory. Unhappiness is treason. Treason is punishable by death. You are troubleshooters, agents of the computer who find trouble and shoot it. Thankfully, due to Friend Computer's all-seeing benevolence, trouble is scarce. Citizens who become aware of trouble are asked to report it to Friend Computer, who will dispatch friendly neighborhood troubleshooters to deal with the trouble. The existence of trouble is impossible due to Friend Computer's omniscience. Claiming that Friend Computer cannot prevent or eliminate all trouble is insubordination. Insubordination is treason. Treason is punishable by death. As a troubleshooter, you certainly are not a part of any secret societies, and you obviously don't have any mutations, and you have never committed treason. Most certainly not. You can also rest well knowing that your troubleshooter allies could never plot against you or Friend Computer. After all, they are troubleshooters. Traitors are trouble. So, if a troubleshooter was a traitor, obviously they would have shot themselves, so they could remove their trouble from our beloved and perfect Alpha Complex. Doing otherwise is treason. Treason is punishable by death. Alpha Complex features a security clearance system based on the colors of the visible spectrum, which heavily restricts what you can and cannot do. Everything from corridors to food and equipment have security restrictions. The lowest rating is infrared, denoting a class of heavily medicated mindless drone workers. You start at security clearance red, having already earned some of the computer's trust by turning in one of your fellow comrades for treason. Those of the highest security clearance, ultraviolet, are almost completely unrestricted, and are the only citizens that may, legally, modify the computer's programming. Thus, ultraviolet citizens are often referred to as high programmers. The rules and mechanics of the game itself is a security clearance ultraviolet classified information. To ever reveal you have knowledge of such sensitive information is treason. Treason is punishable by death. As troubleshooting can be a fairly lethal activity, all troubleshooters are issued a 6-pack of clones. Upon the death of a troubleshooter, Friend Computer will dispatch a clone to the troubleshooter's former location at its earliest convenience. Misuse of additional clones is treason. Treason is punishable by death. This introduction has been brought to you by VitaYum Protein Substitute Bars, now 7% more popular in Sector 5-3X. Enjoy the meaty goodness of VitaYum today. Remember, stay alert, trust no one, and keep your laser handy. So hopefully that gives you like a decent idea as to what the game is like. A little goofy, definitely on the funny side of RPGs, which I find RPGs naturally tend towards anyway. So, these were some expectations that I said before starting the game to my players, just to give them like a rough idea as to how this might differ from some experiences they've had in the past regarding playing RPGs. Now, like in a classic RPG, if the most important factors are like clear communication so that everyone around the table has an exact idea as to what's going on, right? In Paranoia, it's all about just confusion and no one having an idea as to what is happening. And if a classic RPG is about having agency and, you know, being able to do whatever you want and make choices that will have an effect on the story, this game is all about having zero freedom and zero choices and having to do exactly what you're told or else you will be immediately killed. And instead of everyone working together cooperatively to accomplish a mutual goal, this game has a little bit of that, but everyone's real goal is to see through like the desires of their secret society, which will likely mean trying to in some way hinder or stop all your fellow players from doing what they want to do. I also just put a bunch of like pieces of paper all around the table, and people could use them to write secret notes, which is a big part of Paranoia, is everyone communicating each other secretly, which again, that happens like a little bit in D&D, but in Paranoia it is just a constant stream of notes being handed around. But okay, so now I want to talk about why I recommend Paranoia as a game to groups that maybe have played like or generally stuck to more traditional RPGs. So I do think it's like a great tool to get like a new perspective on the RPG game as like a medium to tell stories through. Like for one, people are very specifically given an excuse to screw each other over, so inter-party conflict is very much so heavily incentivized, which I've found in like previous games that I've played. People are hesitant to engage in like trying to screw each other over. And I will say in this session, when we started, we were playing with a bunch of people who had never played with each other before. So I can definitely get picked up on the fact that people they didn't immediately seem comfortable with the idea of trying to screw each other over. But once we got like closer into the second half of that session, that like third act, I think people started to get into the groove of it and really started to be open to the idea of like messing with everyone else and their plans. And I hope that that kind of like bleeds into future sessions and adventures and RPGs that we play, where people will be more comfortable and more open to the idea of like screwing with each other if they think that it'll make for a more fun and more dramatic game. The other point is that the game is just like very deliberately, strictly railroaded, where you guys like are actively being watched the entire time by the computer, who is like this big brother figure, and you are also surrounded by people who will rat you out if you do anything other than exactly what you were ordered to do. So if you want to actually use your player agency and like make choices that influence the story, you have to work really hard to do that, and you have to do it all in secret, and you have to be very creative about it, which in like the traditional RPG, if we're playing Fantasyland D&D, in the past I've definitely run into those moments where I put the players into the kingdom and tell them, you guys can do whatever you want to do. If you want to start a tavern and open one up, or if you want to create an army and go do stuff with an army, the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want with it. I find that often leads to people being like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, just tell us what we're supposed to do, and then we'll start doing that. So I do hope that in this game, like having this experience of having to really dig deep to find any opportunities to express your personal influence on the story and in the game, I'm hoping that when we go back to a more traditional sandbox type approach of a game, that people will have a greater appreciation for being able to just do whatever they want, whenever they want in the game. Okay, so now I want to briefly go through how I handled character creation. So the version of the game we ran was the Paranoia XP, which is probably the most popular and like the classic version of the game, which I definitely prefer like almost everything about it, except the new edition has way better character creation, where you do this thing where you hand over your sheets. Well, first of all, you almost like draft numbers for your stats. So like if I have like a high stat in my like strength equivalent skill or stat or whatever, then the player to my left is going to have a low stat in strength or whatever. And then once everyone has distributed all their stats and has finished like screwing over the person to their left, everyone then hands that sheet to that person to their left that they've just screwed over to now pick and fill in that person's skill bonuses, which I just absolutely love this process for a multitude of reasons. For one, I think it just immediately gets people into that headspace of screwing each other over, and it just results in some very wacky distributions of people's abilities and makes people incredibly incompetent at what they presumably should be good at, which I think definitely lends itself to that just hyper inefficient bureaucratic feeling that this world is supposed to have. So I was very happy with how all of that went regarding character creation. So I also, when it comes to mutations, I think generally you're supposed to just get like a mutation when you create your character, and then you can kind of reveal it whenever. I originally had some very complicated rules for mutations where the more you died and the more clones you used, you would eventually come back with a more and more mutated guy. I eventually dropped that angle for the most part, and I just printed out a whole bunch of slips of all the various mutations in the game, and then just cut them out, and then whenever players got a new clone, they would get a new mutation. I definitely, there is like this weird sort of thing in the game where when someone dies, they are forgiven of all their sins when their new clone arrives. So you kind of have to pretend that like if you found out they were a part of a secret society, that they have like no evidence of being a part of that secret society. And same thing with mutations, is that like if you find out that their previous clone had a mutation, you're not supposed to know that their new clone also has that mutation. But there's nothing in the rules that kind of would like support that fact, which again, I get that that's kind of like this sort of incoherent, confused, inefficient nature of like a vibe the game is trying to capture. But I also just thought it was more fun to just hand out tons of little slips and at least kind of get people excited when they die, because it was now like an opportunity to see what brand new mutation that they got. So it wasn't just a complete feels bad. There's some pretty good ones in here. I do quite like machine empathy. I'm trying to, I know the mutations came up like a couple of times. I should have made this video immediately after the session, because I now do forget what mutations were actually used to an effect, but they definitely, they didn't have like a massive impact on the game, but they definitely they had a couple of shining moments. I did a similar thing with equipment where I printed out little pieces of equipment for when they either got their mandatory bonus duties or when they got equipment from R&D. And then service groups, I did a similar thing. I had just a ludicrous amount of handouts for this game where I just printed out so much stuff. And I will say, originally, I was hoping to get 2, maybe even 3 separate groups together for this game, just because I printed out so much crap and spent so much time making all these little doodads and badges and stuff. Which, I will say, the difficult part of Paranoia, specifically XP Edition, is that it has these 6 roles that I definitely really wanted to make sure that I got exactly 6 players so that we could have those exact 6 roles each filled out. And I know that they got rid of that in the new edition. So I guess I have mixed feelings about that, because I do think the roles are great, and especially when combined with like the secret societies, it gives everyone at least one element of the game that they have like authority over the whole group with. For example, the team leader always gets to lead everyone in combat situations. If you're the hygiene officer, you're allowed to just stop anyone, even the team leader, and give them random hygiene tests. And if you're the equipment guy, you get to inspect everyone's equipment whenever you want. So there's lots of opportunities to sort of just exploit your power and like abuse it to sort of push around the other members of the group. So I love the mandatory bonus duties, but yeah, it is an awkward situation that like you really want to ideally get exactly 6 players. The service groups are more almost just like flavor. This is their job that they had, presumably, like while they're not actively being called upon as a troubleshooter. So for the secret societies, we've got the communist, who now I just basically ran the secret societies as each of them having some sort of little bonus that they get, like a perversity point whenever they like accomplish like a minor little thing over the course of the session. So the communist basically wants to get out of work, and they have to do so by using all of this classical Marxist terminology. And I love that they got a little secret handshake here. The 3 pumps followed by 2 squeezes. The next secret society we have is just the straight up loyal liberal, I think in Secret Hitler would be the term that they use. But you're basically like a spy, you're a covert internal security operative, but you are just a complete lapdog and you just get bonuses whenever you do whatever someone else tells you to do. I think it was like a fun way to like make the one loyal player kind of go along with the schemes of all these other secret society members. And they also had the opportunity to pull a CIA and then like stop someone else and check their note. I forget if this actually came up or if this occurred or not. The next group was the Illuminati. They basically are just trying to get power for the sake of power, and just everything is a secret. So like just no one knows anything about the Illuminati. And so whenever you get accused, whenever you're pulling secret stuff, that's how you get perversity points. And then they also have this once per session ability where they get to basically pull a black bag operation and just to like make someone get disappeared. And then the commie sympathizer is basically the secret Hitler, fascist to someone else's Hitler, if you will, where they are just trying to figure out who the commie is and try to help them. And then they also know the secret commie handshake, so they can ideally, hopefully, try to figure out who the commie is by utilizing this information. Basically, they are just trying to get everyone to work together and work as a team. The Death Leopard is just like the crazy psycho punk who just wants chaos and anarchy. So just whenever they commit terrorism or vandalism, they get a point. Then we have Purge, who is just straight up anti-computer and wants to like overthrow the entire system. And they have the secret handshake 3 exaggerated pumps followed by 2 squeezes, which so hopefully the plan was that like some Purge members and commie members would confuse each other as being parts of their secret society. I definitely tried to push this angle, and it sort of kind of came up, but I guess it definitely helped sort of push the angle of everyone being confused and not knowing what was going on exactly. But I loved that detail so much when I read it in the core book, so I knew I had to include that. But basically, whenever they convince people to act against the computer, that is how they earned points. So now to the adventure itself. I definitely took a lot of inspiration from the Geek and Sundry game that you can watch with, Matt Mercer and that whole crew and them playing Paranoia. And I used a bit of the core adventure. So all the players wake up together and, get assigned their mission. In our game, the first thing that happened here was our Death Leopard sneaking someone else's happy pill, the Illuminati member, back into their sort of medicine dispenser, which did end up coming up later when they were accusing each other. So we did have a little bit of shenanigans going on straight from the start. So we definitely had some people picking up on the vibe as to what kind of game this was going to be. So then everyone got their missions, and they were basically got their order that they had to go and then get their mission. So then they get to the tube way, where, you know, they are about to approach the transport to get to their mission briefing room, when a second train just crashes and immediately obliterates the first train, and gives people a hint as to this whole complex maybe not being as perfect as they might have initially been led to believe. But everyone just continues going on as though like that was supposed to happen. And we had a moment where when they take the transport and they get like halfway to the briefing room, the lights shut off and everything powers off, and they're giving like a few minutes in the pitch black, which is supposed to be an opportunity or a moment for people to start doing whatever crazy shenanigans while it's pitch black, which I don't think we actually had anything happen. Everyone was quite loyal during the like 2 minutes of no power pitch black. Then they got to their briefing room and they got their mandatory bonus duties, and you know, so we filled out our roles. We got the team leader, who was our communist. We have our loyalty officer, who was our death leopard. We had our hygiene officer, who was the covert ops. Our comms and recording, who I want to say was the commie sympathizer. The equipment guy was our purge member, and then happiness officer was the Illuminati. They got their equipment, and then they were sent to another room. And basically, the entire adventure is just like a goose chase, where you're told to go to this room, and then as soon as you get there, you're told that you don't have either the clearance or you don't have the proper paperwork, and that you have to go to another room to get the proper paperwork. And that was basically the entire session, was just a chain of that sort of wild goose chase going on. So when they get their gear, they only have a couple of laser pistol barrels provided to them, so they had to choose who got to actually get their own pistol, which I thought was just a fun little opportunity to immediately start accusing each other and saying who deserves to have a ray gun and who can be trusted. Then when they leave, they are met with a guy who is very clearly a communist, who's wearing an Ushanka and has an AK-47. And he actually stuck around for a while. I wasn't sure if he was going to immediately get accused and killed by the players or anything like that, but they managed to keep him for a while, which certainly helped that the team leader was the commie, and was kind of able to save Boris for a while. Oh, actually, this is when they get their laser barrels, is after being escorted to the office room by Boris. Then they saw a woman running away with like a baby. And again, this was an opportunity for people to either show their loyalty or pull some treasonous behavior, which ultimately they actually saved the lady and got her away with the baby after the Death Leopard exploded the crossbow turret that was activated by Friend Computer to terminate her. So they managed to actually, escape Alpha Complex with their baby safely. So I'm sure, I forgot to mention this, but I should have had a post-credit sequence during the game of showing them getting out and then like continuing society outside of Alpha Complex or something like that. So then we got the Office of Logistics and Bureaucratic Supervision that they had to go to. This was like to get the proper paperwork for the equipment that they needed to complete the mission. So this was just basically the office from Brazil. And then they're told when they get here, they don't have the ink to print out the forms that they need. So they have to go to a printing chamber to get the ink. On their way there, though, they get stopped because they cannot move through this, I believe it's orange or yellow corridor that they couldn't move through. There was a couple of officers, some like oranges and blues, fighting off some war bots that have gone crazy, and they were commanded by the sergeant to go to the R&D to get a weapon to be able to destroy these war bots, which they went to R&D. I did the thing from the Geek and Sundry game where there was just a massive line outside of R&D to get the new bouncy bubbly beverage that I forget exactly what they did, but they managed to cut their way to the front of the line, and they got all their various equipment and then took that back to the room with the war bots, and the sergeant was able to temporarily promote them to a higher rank and get them through that chamber with the help of the new equipment. They got to the printing chamber, and then they found out that they were out of ink and that they needed cyan ink to get this form printed out, and they had to go to a new corridor 20 miles away to harvest ink from a squid. So they got to this like highway where they needed to find a car. Again, I stole a moment from a Geek and Sundry thing where there was a guy guarding a hover tank who asked the players to just watch it for them for a couple of minutes. And then at this point, the Bacardi started hitting, and the rest of my memory of the session is starting to get a little hazy. But I remember they went down the corridor. I do remember that people had to start leaving at this point. It was like, okay, we got maybe like 30 minutes to wrap up the entire session or something. So as they're like rushing down the highway to get this ink, they are getting chased by a bunch of Death Leopards and Mad Max vehicles that I think they use like the gravitron cannon to blow them up. They get to the printing, or not the printing chamber, they get to the aquarium, and they get the ink, and then they get back, and then they print out the form, and then they get to take the form to the bureaucratic office where they can get it filled out, and then they take the form that's filled out, and then they take it to the equipment room where they can finally get the thermal transmitter or whatever it was called, and then they get to the room with the equipment malfunction that they're supposed to replace, and they basically discover that this thermal radiation emitter is a light bulb, so they went on this whole crazy mission just to have to replace a light bulb. Was the whole joke that I think I stole that from the Geek and Sundry game too. I honestly forget. I think that was the whole point though. But then they eventually finish that mission and they go to debriefing, where they ultimately discover that they actually went to the wrong briefing room because it was redacted in the original message that they had received, and then they were all given coupons for an auto termination booth to all execute themselves due to their failure to complete the proper mission. So that was the adventure. Some highlights, definitely the Death Leopard sneaking the happy pill into the Illuminati members' like medicine dispenser, and then at some point the Illuminati member called out the Death Leopard for doing something during our highway chase scene, and the Death Leopard then getting black bagged and removed, and then the Illuminati member getting executed by Frank Computer for treason. Another highlight moment was definitely the commie team leader just spewing some real commie talk the entire session about the plight of the infrareds and the common good that they needed to fight for, especially when the infrareds were crushed by the transbot after it was flung off the tracks at the beginning of the session. And then everyone else mostly being afraid to say anything about accusing the team leader, so they just all went along with everything that the team leader had said. But definitely there were a few moments of accusations against the team leader for being a commie, but I don't recall any of them being formal accusations. But that was a good moment. I did quite enjoy that. And again, I just like I printed out so much crap and so many little slips of paper and stuff. So I'll post all of this crap in the description, and then if you want to use any of it, you know, obviously go ahead. Printed out some pictures to put onto my DM screen. Then this was the cyan ink needs to be replenished printout handout. This was another DM screen, the know your clearance. This was the map that originally, you can see how I started here and started filling out the rooms. And then I started running out of time before the session and just very quickly filled out the rest of the map. But I originally wanted to have this fully fleshed out and have a little more room for players to like explore and like sneak off on their own, which if I ever run this session again, I might add a bit more to this map, which I do hope and plan to run this session again with a new group of people, ideally. Here's some more handouts I made, the wider awake side effects for the happiness officer, the 10 signs of commie traitorism for the loyalty officer, and then a printout for the actual mission assignment alert. And then I also printed out a bunch of name tags for everyone, which I got a bunch of sticky paper stickers to make fake Magic the Gathering cards, so I already had a lot of the resources required to make very nice handouts and print them out, so I figured, I'd go all out for this one. And, I brainstormed a couple of other ideas that never made its way in. There's another group called the Romantics, who are all about basically doing their whole Dead Poet Society and keeping alive the pre-Alpha Complex art, but they just, the only thing they find is just the stuff that's the most common, so they're all just like obsessed with like Disney movies and Star Wars and like Star Trek and stuff, and just like the most like corporate just like art that exists in media. But they sell it as like just being like absolutely like the most refined peak of culture in the world. So I was gonna have a guy that sells them a videotape of Dunstan checks in, or at least offer it to them, and then have this be another sort of loyalty test as to whether or not the players want to try to buy this from him or like report him or do whatever. I think next time I might add the Romantics as another secret society, just because I love them as a group so much. But since I didn't have them as a secret society, I figured like, well, I'm not going to include the whole Dunstan checks in bit. I also wanted to have like a Logan's Run sort of like Running Man deal, where the players would either have the opportunity to save someone running away or to help hunt them down. But I figure this one is kind of just too close to the woman running away with her baby, so I was like, well, whatever, I'll just choose the one that I kind of like more. That's about what I had for the brainstorming. This was the form that I had. Shout out ChatGPT for letting me just type in, hey, give me a form for Paranoia for a replacement part. And then they made a pretty good, convincing little DMV type of form for me. And yeah, that was it. I highly recommend Paranoia. Great game. Great session. I definitely want to run it again. Hopefully I can get another group of 6 people together. We will see if that is possible. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.